Listeners, welcome to Destination Aviation. I'm Jeff Miller, your host, coming to you from the great state of Alaska, our 49th state. We actually, let's see, that would have been 1940, no, excuse me, 1959. 1959, Alaska joined the United States, purchased from Russia for $7.2 million in 1867, which amounted to less than 2 cents per acre. The deal was negotiated by the U.S. Secretary of State, William Seward, which actually, until I was looking this up, so that's 586,000 square miles purchased. Seward was the town I was in last night. I took a drive, I rented a vehicle, and I drove from Anchorage, Alaska. I'm here for a conference, and I drove from Anchorage. I drove north, so I put over 500 miles on my rental car in one day because I really had one day to cram in everything I wanted to do without going and doing the aviation conference stuff. So I went north because I've never been to Alaska myself. So I went north up to the tundra and to see the world's, or I say the world's, I should say Jeff Miller's world premiere of a glacier because I've never seen a glacier before. So I went up there and I saw. I'm gonna try not to butcher it. The Matanuska Glacier. I think that's it. It's Matanuska. Matanuska. But it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see, and even the same with the tundra. So that's kind of a north because I did the usual tourist. Hey, what's the best way if you need a day trip and you want to get as much crammed in as possible? And it's kind of basically go north on Highway 1 and make your way all the way up to the tundra and or go south on Highway 1 and connect to Highway 3 and find yourself down in Seaward. And I actually, that's even directions I can't get lost with 1 and 3. But no, it's actually funny because we have a director that I work with. His name is Sayward, but oftentimes people mispronounce it and call him Seaward. And so I was laughing to myself as I walked around in Seaward that that was his town. But and it's interesting because if you go back and listen to some of our episodes, you've probably seen that we had a Alaska episode on here before, where I talked about the congressman whose aircraft went down, Nick Begich, and his aircraft's actually still missing. It's never been found. Well, he's had offspring, and his grandson, Nick Begich III, he just won his first House seat, which I think is the only House seat in Alaska. They only have one U.S. representative, but he won it in 2024 as a Republican. I think his granddad was a Democrat, the one who's missing. Um, but yeah, and so I was driving up towards the tundra and I saw the sign and I thought, oh, that was in the episode. And yeah, it was one of those moments where I learned so much doing the podcast. I love it because I'm like, oh, I know that history, and even researching this down and Seaward, and I'm like, oh, okay, so he was responsible for purchasing Alaska from Russia. So it's really cool, and right across the street from here, actually outside of my window. So I'm staying at the historic Anchorage Inn in beautiful downtown Anchorage. Uh, Not at the conference hotel. I booked late on this conference, so I didn't get in the conference hotel. But I can see. Okay, all right, folks. Now I'm not gonna try to butcher this. To butcher some stuff on here before, but the name of this military base is Elmdorf, and I will admit I went and looked at it again to see if I can get it exactly right. But this was just in the news. If you know, that's where President Trump met with President Putin for their summit on the Ukraine war and other items. So literally right across the way from here. So that's kind of cool to see just the history of, and actually just more recently future history of that kind of connection point. And this is the airspace where Russia is always kind of breaking in when you see it on the news. Russia's, it's in United States airspace. And so a lot of stuff happens up in Alaska. Huge. I think if you take Alaska, it basically would encompass half of the U.S. continental, if you could place it basically right over the top of it. So even me driving over 500 miles yesterday, I literally just scratched the surface of this state. But I love to see all the aviation stuff. It's hugely connected by aviation and the state itself just because of the mere magnitude of it. So you're literally driving down the road and you see planes, little strips off the back of people's yards. And I love that. I think that's really cool when you're looking up in the sky and you see seaplanes and just caravans and unique style of aircraft. We've highlighted, as I spoke about, Alaska in the past on some of these episodes, but I figured we are Destination Aviation. Let's have a true Destination Aviation episode as I record from the beautiful historic Anchorage Inn in downtown Anchorage. To really just say, really appreciate all the support I get on the channel. I know I've been a little bit off. I've been a little bit under the weather. I don't know if I picked something up in Dallas or where it came from. I mentioned that in the past episode. But now it's just kind of been sitting in my lungs. And, as I work through that process, haven't been feeling too great about, how I've been feeling. And so it's been difficult to get these episodes out. I've had to push off a couple of interviews, and those are coming up down the road because I know people love the interview guests. I've been working through a few things on my own. I know I spoke to some people on here before, but I went on a Waco a biplane ride, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And right now I'm in the process of looking to purchase one, potentially in the spring or summer for the channel, and also for me. Let's say me, because I would love to have one. But I'm really going from a tricycle wheel pilot to a tail dragger, and I've never flown a tail dragger before, so I've gotten some really good tips. I've actually met a pilot who owns a Waco, and he's talked me through a lot of different things that he's doing. Actually, we'll have the opportunity here in the near future to talk to the person that started Waco and recreated it. Since has sold it off, but just to give me a breath of knowledge. And I love that all these aviation experts are willing to share their knowledge with me. Because obviously, as I always say on this channel, I want to do it right and safe, but also have fun. And so I think there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff to come out of that. A lot of cool stuff for where I see not only the podcast going, but what Destination Aviation in itself is doing. And so it's growing. I love that it's growing, putting out the podcast stickers everywhere. We did put together a little TikTok video. I'll try to get it out on there today, tomorrow, of at least the arrival into Alaska, and you'll probably like what it is. If you like the channel, you'll like what it is. So get on our TikTok. You can find the link through our website www.destinationaviation.org if you'd like to get on and see what we have going on. So along with this theme of Oaxaco, which that was my first schooling in Oaxaco, and thank you to Andrew who helped me with I thought it was pronounced Waco, like Waco, Texas. I might have mentioned this before on here, but Andrew one helped me with that, and Andrew also created a beautiful sign for Destination Aviation out of wood. Him and his awesome, amazing, beautiful family did that. They spent a lot of hours doing it. I put a picture on Instagram of it in my LinkedIn account. I think what we'll probably end up doing at some point is putting video on these for the YouTube channel so people can see it, but maybe we'll use it as a centerpiece behind it. Like I said, there's a lot going on within the channel, and just a lot to get through, but it's awesome stuff. It means that people are listening to it, which I love. But Andrew helped me with the Waco destination definition information. But I love that kind of one style of flying, which is very prominent up here in Alaska, kind of the bush style of flying. So I thought how appropriate it would be to talk about bush pilots, kind of the history of it, and Alaska in general, and how really aviation made it connected and turned it into the state that it is today, because it has such a rich history of it, really more on display than any other state that I've been in, because you can really see how prominent aviation is to the success of Alaska. So I would love to highlight that, which we're going to do here. But we probably should start with some facts and figures about Alaska, just so, because there's some cool stuff out there as I was doing some research into this about Alaska itself and how important aviation really is to Alaska itself. And so some of this is probably known to some of the listeners out there because I know you're aviation experts, but those that tune in that aren't, ask Alaska, Alaska relies heavily on aviation, as we talked about. 82% of the communities are only accessible by air. I mean, can you imagine that? 82% are only accessible by air. That's insane to think, like where we all live in the continental United States. That's basically non-existent in the lower 48 states. Everything's connected by a road or train or both. I mean, at this point, I don't know of a town that's not connected by a road, unless you're distilling moonshine out in the Appalachians somewhere. Everything is connected by the road system. So thank you to Dwight D. Eisenhower for that interstate system that we have. So yeah, 82%. That's insane. Is connected only by air. And the pilot to resident ratio is 6 times the national average. Makes sense, right? It's basically your automobile. And they have the largest seaplane base in the world, which I will get a chance to see here. I'll take some photos of it and put up on the Instagram and put it to an amazing song because that's what I do. No, people seem to like the TikToks, which I'm good. Try to figure out enter into that realm, but it has numerous airport landing areas. I was just at one the other night in Seaward, and you literally could just drive onto the airfield. You could pull up. Now, it's obviously the sign said this is state property. Don't drive onto the airport. Which in Alaska, all the airports are run by the state of Alaska, and so but they kind of treat you like an adult. They didn't have a fence line or anything. You literally could drive onto the runway. Obviously, I didn't do that. I didn't even go past the fence line. Um, and I should say like half kind of fence line. They had like probably 100 feet of fence up by the ramp, but they had giant holes in it. And then the majority, I'd say, 95% of the airport had no barrier around it. So it is cool to see that some places you can still kind of be treated as an adult and be like, okay, I shouldn't go onto this space. I won't do it. But it did offer an opportunity to take some neat pictures, at least from the sidelines, which was pretty cool to see. So that's I talked about the world's largest seaplane base here in Anchorage. Um, and so when we talk, we're going to get into a little bit about the history of the Bush pilot and the early settlers into the area that were really started to use aviation as a tool to get year-round contact to villages, delivery of supplies, and throughout the vast state. They're talking about over 500,000 square miles of space to connect to uh, not only the rest of the world, but to just other people within the state. I mean, it's an amazing feat to see how they used aviation to connect everything together. So we talked a little bit about the essential access. Extensive facility. The state has hundreds of public use airports, heliports, seaplane bases, along thousands of unconstructed landing areas on lakes, gravel bars, that are notes in the Alaska Department of Transportation public facilities. Lake Hood, Anchorage is it's the largest seaplane base. Talked about that. Probably get a chance to go over there here soon. Um, we talked about the 1 in 6 pilot numbers. Alaska has a significantly higher pilot to resident ratio compared to the national average United States. One in every 78 Alaskans are a pilot, which again makes sense, right? If you have a immense amount of connectivity you need to have people that are able to fly those aircraft. Um, it's interesting because we talked about Dong Young and the congressman. You can go back and listen to those episodes. But they had the Alaska Aviation Safety Initiative, dedicated to improving safety standards. If you read the advisory, excuse me, not the advisory circulars, but the federal aviation regulations for flying, like Part 91, uh, any of those, usually they have a caveat drilled out inside of that for if you're flying in Alaska, because there are a lot of special rules just for the type of flying out here, right? Like, oh, you can have an axe with you. um, but, that type of, if you're traveling in this type of environment, it is challenging. Flying in Alaska requires careful planning due to distances between airports, mountain terrains, deceptive passes, and year-round icing conditions. It's really cool up here because, like I said, aviation's really immersed into the culture. When I was driving up Highway 1, and I had stopped, and it was down, this kind of back road up to the footprint of where you get into the glacier, and I was talking to the folks in that establishment, and they were like, "Head down the road, go to the tundra. It's beautiful in the fall, and stop at Eureka." And get yourself some food. I was like, okay. And so I did. And I was talking to a friend on the phone when I had service because service was spotty between there and Eureka. And they were like, well, what did they recommend a restaurant? And I'm like, no, they didn't. But from the way things look, maybe it's possible there's only one. And it wasn't even a town. It was Eureka is a little diner off the side of the road. It was really people were really friendly. It was really cool. It was really nice. Awesome experience. But one of the things I thought was cool is again kind of being immersed in aviation. There's signs all over this little diner, and there's about signs from the FAA about flying safely. I actually took a picture of one of them. And it's really just telling pilots and passengers how to be safe when you're getting in an aircraft and navigating the skies in Alaska. But again, you're not going to go into a diner in Illinois and see that unless you're a, Pilot Pete's down in Schaumburg or something where, it's aviation themed. But it was really cool to see, like, it's just, wasn't even just like, you go into like a, TGI Fridays or a Applebee's or something, and they put a bunch of knickknacks on the wall. Like, it's living, breathing guidance. So, like, when you're done eating your food, get up and like, oh yes, there's a reminder of how to fly safely in Alaska. So I thought that was really cool. We want to get into the bulk of our episode today, which is really about bush pilots and flying in Alaska and some of that rich history of aviation in Alaska. So we'll kick off with that and then follow up with some show notes at the end, as we always do. When you think of Alaska today, you might picture cruise ships in Juneau, Taurus and Denali, or big jets landing in Anchorage. But not that long ago, in the 1920s and 30s, Alaska was essentially cut off from the rest of the world. No road system to speak of. Boats took weeks, and the weather was brutal. That's where aviation came in. The first bush pilots were flying machines that barely looked like they should get off the ground. Open cockpits, skis or floats bolted on, and engines that didn't always want to start in sub-zero weather. Yet these pilots risked everything to connect isolated villages. They hauled mail, medicine, miners, missionaries, and even animals. There are stories of pilots stuffing live pigs and chickens into the back of seats of their planes. One of the most famous early pilots was Noel Wing. In 1924, he became the first person to fly across the Arctic Circle. A year later, he flew the first commercial flight in Alaska, from Fairbanks to Nome, in a biplane with only room for one passenger. People said at the time that Wing could land a plane anywhere, on frozen rivers, gravel bars, or strips carved out of the forest. The work was incredibly dangerous, maps were unreliable, weather was unpredictable, and radio communication was often non-existent. Pilots used mountains and rivers as their road maps, and if a storm rolled in, you were on your own. Many didn't survive. The joke at the time was, there are old pilots and there are bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. But out of this came a culture, and even airlines. Wing's little flying business grew into Wing Air Alaska, which by 1940s was one of the largest airlines in the state. Other companies, like Alaska Airlines, also got their start flying supplies into villages where no roads existed. In Alaska, an airplane wasn't just a convenience, it was survival. Even today, there are more pilots per capita in Alaska than anywhere else in the United States. Whole towns still depend on small planes to bring groceries, mail, and medicine. And it all traces back to those early bush pilots who looked at Alaska's wilderness and thought, yeah, I can land there. So, for those of you that are returning listeners to our show, you know from the general theme of history that the 1920s was really an explosion of aviation in the United States. There's the Airmail Act of 1925, or also known as the Kelly Act, that was sponsored by U.S. Representative Clyde Kelly, which really kind of propelled and kicked off this 1920s aviation boom, where now the United States Postal Service was using aircraft to pay for flights. In the 1920s, the early, talking in Alaska, why planes suddenly seen the solution of Alaska is a lot of this, right? They're really meant entering the mainstream. Rivers iced over in the winter, boats couldn't travel, roads basically didn't exist. Planes could cross distances in hours instead of weeks. And then we have the introduction of Noel Wing, the legendary first flight. So the 1924 Arctic Circle flight. This was a flight in which Noel himself flew out of Fairbanks, Alaska, and transported two miners to their claim, which was north of the Arctic Circle. It really kicked off his ability to fly before radio, before charts, really flying off of land based navigation. And we talked earlier, Noel went on to create Wing Aviation and one of the largest aircraft operators in the state of Alaska. But this really started that kind of, oh, wait, we can get past all of this and not have to worry about what we talked about earlier, icing over roads, rivers, etc. Noel, who was famous for his attitude of I'll land anywhere, has the first commercial flight in 1925 between Fairbanks and Nome, where actually the mayor of Fairbanks handed a letter to deliver in the Bering Sea City, just 560 miles from Fairbanks. The aircraft that was used was a Fokker monoplane. It left June 4th, 1925, and made the flight in 7 hours and 40 minutes. The cost of this charter was $1,500. Seems pretty steep, but it is the first one. I say that. Well, I guess I don't know. I just was working with someone who went on a charter flight out of an airport, and they paid $2,500 per person on an Ultra. So maybe not. And they flew, well, as the crow flies. I think it's about 200 miles north into Wisconsin. So, you know what? That actually is a bargain, especially considering the time. Another pioneer of the time was Carl Ben Ellison. He flew the first airmail test flight in Alaska on February 21st, 1924, from Fairbanks to McGrath. This flight covered 280 miles in just 4 hours, demonstrated the viability of airmail in Alaska, and was critical step in establishing regular air service in the region. Another pioneer in aviation in Alaska. And I have to say, too, my hotel sits just off of Merrill Field Airport, MRI. And so I love it because while I'm doing this podcast, I can actually hear aircraft going over the top of my head. It's a really cool, radial sounding aircraft. It's just so neat up here with all these planes. It's kind of immersed in history. I don't even have to do sound effects. I can literally just put the microphone out the window of the hotel. Now, we may get some people yelling up from the street. I don't know. But it could be fun, could be cool. All right, let's keep going on with our history here of the bush pilot in Alaska. So, if you can imagine, it's 30 below zero. The engine is coughing, refusing to turn over. A single pilot stands in the middle of a frozen river, yanking at a propeller with frostbitten hands. They know that this plane doesn't start. People in a village up north may not get their medicine in time. When you talk about flying in Alaska, especially in the early days, open cockpit biplanes with skis, floats, or wheels swapped out depending on the season. No radios, poor maps, no weather forecasting. Uh, your passengers or mail, mining equipment, missionaries. We talked to chickens, pigs, even reindeer calves could sit in the seats of these aircraft. Um, Whiteout conditions, sky and ground blending together, ground loops on rough airstrips. That myself, like I said, being a tricycle pilot, talking with some of the people that fly the Wacos, I have been hearing from friends that are aerobatic pilots and in that side of the world. Some say about the porpoising. Obviously, that's some of my concern. Your center of gravity sits, behind the main landing gear, and so when you're landing in that potential porpoising that could happen, that was in my mind. But some of the people that own these Wacos told me, well, you really need to look out for ground loops because you read online, and they talk about a traditional kind of either landing on the main gear or landing with both the landing gear and the tail wheel on a tail dragger aircraft. They got a 3 point landing. Most pilots say not to do that for the potential effect of a ground loop, basically losing control of the aircraft upon landing, whether you're, especially in Alaska, maybe you're on not a surface like, an asphalt surface. These aircraft are designed to actually, from what I understand, land better in grass areas. But if those areas are maintained, right, and you don't end up into what that ground loop is, basically you spin the plane around and potentially cause damage to the aircraft, either the wing or the landing gear itself, could be a very expensive day, especially back in these days. Engines freezing in midair. Uh, there's statistics out there about many pilots not making it past their first year in the Alaska bush. They are admired, but people also said you have to be a little bit reckless because, we talked about there are no old, bold pilots when flying in the Alaska bush. And you see the terrain around here, even just driving through it. I spent 500, I think it was 550, 560 miles in the car yesterday, and just watching some of the mountains and the aircraft going around them. It's amazing, and you can just imagine how quickly that weather conditions, things are outside of your control, are changing. And then you have villages that only saw a ship, twice a year, are settling, getting regular supplies from an aircraft. Medical evacuations become possible. Bush pilots flying doctors and patients. Bush aviation grew into airlines. We talked about Win and Alaska Airlines evolved from Bush routes, running a famous milk run that still serves isolated coastal towns today, with delivering things like milk supplies. During World War II, Bush pilots trained military pilots how to fly in extreme cold, and Alaska became a strategic hub for that. Not only a strategic hub in then, but also too, we could do a whole episode on basically the Cold War, and even today we talked a little bit about it with Alaska being so close to Russia that it is a strategic location for the United States. I mean, you can imagine a world where if Alaska wasn't sold by Russia to the United States, where literally they would be, up to our back, I guess, back door, north door, however you want to refer to it, but they would be, neighbors with Canada, where now, because of this, we have, at least in the lower 48, you have some distance between you, continental United States and Russia. But if you look at the islands in the Bering Strait, specifically the Diomede Islands, you actually have roughly 4 miles between the United States and Russia. So they are close neighbors to ours. And so it is a strategic outpost, and Russia really speaks to that. If you go back to some of our other episodes where we talked about, Duluth, and we talked about Marquette, Michigan, and some of the strategic positioning of aircraft and missiles in the Cold War, Alaska obviously played a huge role in that. So maybe some future episodes to come on that front. But when we really look at, the Bush pilot, we talked about Noel wing flying with, sled dogs tied in the back seat, pilots landing on sandbars, frozen rivers, or whatever looked flat enough. But they really just emboldened the true kind of spirit of aviation, which I love. And being up here, it's so cool. And even in the process of recording, because recording, podcast takes a little bit of time, and you kind of start and stop. And in between when I'm doing here in my day job, which I'll talk a little bit at the end of the episode, um, this really gives me an opportunity to read knowledge. And as part of that, I went to the Alaska Aviation Museum, which just, if you get to Anchorage, or you're lucky enough to get up here to Alaska, like I have been, absolutely amazing museum and some amazing pieces in there. And part of that process was reading some of the stuff. And as I was thinking about, this episode and going through the Bush pilot, there's some really cool stuff. And there was really this kind of this paragraph written on the first 50 years of Alaska takes flight. And so I'll kind of go read through it because it does kind of encapsulate very well the people we've talked about previously and the history here in Alaska of really the bush flight and the kind of final frontier, if you will, in the United States for aviation. One of the last frontiers on Earth, Alaska was mysterious, dangerous, and full of unknown potential. This land has been occupied by native peoples for thousands of years. It wasn't until the 18th century that Western explorers established permanent settlements in the territory. With the discovery of gold in the late 19th century, tens of thousands of fortune seekers set upon the land, setting up towns like Iditarod and Nome. Upon introduction of the airplane, Alaska's wide expanses were suddenly within reach. No longer did travelers have to spend days or weeks traveling across the territory, but they could glide over the treetops in mere hours. Alaska, a land with few roads or rails, would grow exponentially with this new technology. The early era of aviation was full of peril and opportunity. Brave men and women carved out their niche in a new and untested industry, pushing Alaska to the modern age. The airplane changed the world, and Alaska is where the story flight unfolds. One of the stories I wanted to highlight from my time, and again, if you get time to go to the Alaska Aviation Museum, please do. It was so much fun. And so cool, and it's right there at the seaplane base. So when I started this episode, I said I hadn't got a chance to get to Lake Hood and really explore the seaplane base. Well, now I have, with the power of Jeff being a little bit behind on getting his full podcast done. But I was able to go and enjoy it. And so you get to go up in their little mock tower. You get to go around and see and talk to different pilots. It was so much fun, and you could get on a plane yourself. I have a little bit of time left over before I take my red eye home on Thursday, and I'm thinking about maybe catching a flight. I have some colleagues that went on a flight up to Mount Denali, and I heard it was just amazing, and it was like $600 a person, and for that price point, how could you not want to go to Mount Denali? So back to the story, though, that I want to talk about was Stephen E. Mills, which I have some Mills in my family. I'm not sure if they're related to this Mills, probably not. um, but my uncle Bill Mills, he was a farmer, so maybe he was a distant relative and decided to move his way to Michigan and stop flying. But the beginning of an era. So Steve Mills first came to Alaska in 1932, seeking adventure and fortune. He partnered with two former students, Jack Waterworth and Charles Rutten, to purchase a fleet biplane. And as we know from what I said at the beginning of this episode, the biplane is near and dear to my heart. And so this, a little bit selfishly, the story caught my eye. The group set out for Seward, Alaska. As we know, we were just talking about Seward. As I traveled down there and had a delicious halibut burger in Seward, and took some pictures of the airport there, which I will put on the TikTok. But they flew down to Seward in March of 1932, shipping their dismantled plane aboard the SS Yukon. After flying from Seward to Anchorage, the trio incorporated Star Air Service on April 14th of 1932. Star Air Service was originally founded as a flight instruction school and is credited with licensing the first two women pilots in Alaska, Mary Burroughs and Irene Irvine. I think I got that correct. I would also say, just as a side note here, I was told the other day by a state official that a lot of people in Alaska don't have pilot license. They just learn to fly, and it's a big thing with the FAA that they're trying to get people to actually have a license, but they just learn from relatives how to fly, and so they never actually go and get a permit to do so. So there's a lot of other pilots in Alaska that just aren't really accounted for because we don't know that they exist necessarily, or should I say the federal government doesn't know that they exist. It soon became obvious that Star would need to take on additional business in order to compete, so the additional investors at Star acquired a second plane. The aircraft that they purchased was a Curtiss Robin. The competition in Anchorage became fierce with the introduction of two new flying outfits, McGee Airways and Woodley Airways. Mac McGee, wishing to return to his mining operations, sold McGee Airways to Star Air Service in 1934 for 1934. I was thinking $34,000 for $50,000. The addition of McGee Fleet made Star Air Service the largest airline operation in Alaska. By 1936, Star Air Service had a fleet of 22 aircraft and an annual income surpassing $190,000. Star Air Service started with humble beginnings, but through the acquisitions and mergers, this little flight training school would evolve into Alaska Airlines, one of the largest airlines in history. Now, that I thought was really cool. And then they actually have a piece inside of this museum of the aircraft engine and some broken parts. And this is kind of the tragedy and recovery of the aircraft, as was the fate of many Alaskan pioneer pilots. On August 30th of 1936, Steve Mills' luck ran out. Aboard the Star's pacemaker, Mills was flying a fishing charter for 5 Anchorage residents. After an afternoon of idyllic fishing and beautiful Russian Lake, the Mills lifted off the aircraft of the lake fully loaded. The flight path required clearing the mountains surrounding the lake. While no one can say for sure what happened, it is theorized that a strong downdraft over the ridge line brought down the aircraft on top. All 6 souls perished in the crash. In August of 1995, Steve Mills' grandson, David Mills, contacted the Alaska Aviation Heritage Museum to research his grandfather's Alaskan history. When upon learning that he had actually visited the crash site a month earlier and showed photos of the engine, the decision was made to recover the wreckage of the aircraft. The museum team and Dave Mills traveled to the crash site with a Lhasa helicopter and effected the recovery of the Wright J6 engine. Also recovered were many personal artifacts from the wreckage. So the wreckage itself is actually on display in the museum. Again, a really awesome opportunity to just get up and close and personal with a lot of cool aviation history there that they have on display. So again, a really cool thought and concept that the Alaska Aviation Museum has. And I heard the Alaskan Aviation State Director say that he travels to a lot of airports, and every airport there's always a good museum. He said in aviation nobody ever throws away anything, which is good though because now we have a legacy of past history. So that was really cool to see. So again, shout out to the museum, and if you find yourself in Anchorage, go and take a look at it. So we could really talk about the legacy of bush flying for a long time. I mean, there's so much history. Just going through, I mean, we scratch the surface. I look at it kind of the same as me coming to Alaska, and what I was able to do in my time here is not even probably scratching the surface. But talking about some of these amazing flying contraptions that were up here, and also some of the amazing stories and people that really made Alaska what it is today. And now, I mean, you can see aviation just on full display everywhere in Alaska. Alaska is beautiful, but even if you don't have an affinity for aviation, you come anyways. But especially if you do, you get such an opportunity to get up and close and personal with these aircraft. And they say they kind of treat you as an adult here still, where you can get onto these airfields kind of, or at least adjacent, and look out and talk to pilots, see cool aircraft, and it's not hidden or protected or put away from people coming up and using it. I mean, Alaska, we talked about, has more pilots per capita than anywhere else in the United States. Most of the towns are still rely entirely on aviation supplies. And bush flying has really become a part of Alaska's identity. Equal parts necessity, romance, and adventure. The bush pods of Alaska weren't just daredevils and old airplanes. They built lifelines, communities, and a way of life that still depends on wings to this day. And one of the things I just saw some people that I know on LinkedIn, obviously they don't know that I'm doing this episode, but they were talking about the milk run, which is part of what I saw in here, because there's still talk about over 80% of the communities in Alaska aren't accessible by roads, or any other real means besides flying. And so bush flying isn't just history, it's happening every single day. You may have heard some of the flights as we've been doing this podcast fly over my historic Anchorage hotel here in downtown, and talking to some of the residents about how critical it is. Everybody knows somebody or themselves are a pilot, and how interconnected it is, which is really cool because a lot of times you hear negative aspects maybe of aviation, and I think that there are certain communities out there where the airport has become more of a nuisance. But here, I was listening to the aviation director, Alaska director for the state, say that, in this state, when somebody hears an aircraft, they know medicine and food and supplies are coming. And so it becomes kind of this ritual of, oh, all the good stuff is coming on the plane. And so back to, what I saw somebody put on LinkedIn is this milk run, which is the modern day ending kind of, what do I ending, but continuation, we should say, of what we see with bush flying. And Alaska Airlines, as we were just talking about, from their historic roots, operates one of the most unusual routes in the United States. Locals call it the Milk Run. It's not a single flight, but a series of daily hops up and down the southeast coast. So an Alaska Airlines jet leaves Seattle and goes to Anchorage. And like we said before, it bounces up and down the coast, places like Petersburg, Juneau. Um, I want to say it. Uh, Ketchikan, Ketchikan. You guys correct me. You send me a note. Correct me on that one. I'll be the first to say it's a beautiful language. I don't want to butcher their towns because there's been some really cool places I've seen, signs and stuff. Somebody asked me, "Where are you at?" And I had just saw a sign on the side of the highway, and it was Chickaloon, which I just love saying Chickaloon. But the aircraft drops off groceries, mail, medicine, and yes, even cartons of milk. For a lot of these towns that have no roads to connect them to the rest of Alaska, the plane is the road. The milk is essentially a modern version of the Noel Wing or Carl Ellison, what they were doing in a century ago, connecting people and keeping communities alive, making sure Alaska stays linked to the world. So when you see an Alaska Airlines jet pull into a small town on a rainy day, unloading boxes of produce and packages while passengers stretch their legs, you're looking at the legacy of those original Bush pilots. They proved that aviation wasn't just about flying or fun or adventure. In Alaska, it was and still is about survival. And that legacy lives on in every wingtip carving a path through the Alaskan sky. And I did have an opportunity while I was here to talk to an Alaska Airlines pilot. And ironically, they don't get to come to Alaska a lot. They were just here going to Fairbanks, and they said they absolutely loved that airport. And so that was really cool to hear because in my history with Alaska Airlines, a lot of people don't know. I had somebody when I worked in San Jose say, "Hey, I'm looking for a flight to Hawaii." And I'm looking at Hawaiian Airlines, I'm looking at United, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, "Have you looked at Alaska?" And they're like, "I'm not flying to Alaska." So I think there's still this kind of misunderstanding that Alaska Airlines goes a lot of places. As a matter of fact, they're expanding their network vastly and they have acquired Hawaiian too, but they're going to places now like Reykjavik and these really far outlying locations from what their small roots started in Alaska and purchasing things like the 787. So it's really cool to see. To my friends, that is, I think, the end for right now on our Bush Pilot friends. So much to talk about, but I know I haven't had a chance to get an episode out, and I want to make sure that I still stay connected with people that reach out and, say, hey, we're looking for an episode, especially the story episodes. People seem to like the story episodes. And like I said, we have some pretty good interviews coming up as well. And so I would say to Corey S., who reached out through the email and said, "When are you going to put out your next episode?" Right now, Corey. So here you go. But no, I am actually up here at the National Aviation State. Wait, I swear I just had this acronym down. And now here we are, Jeff, butchering it again. NASAO, which is the National Association of State Aviation Officials. So if you've gone back and listened to some of our episodes where we talk about funding in the United States, there's a lot of states there's 10 that are block grant, which is like Illinois, which actually manage putting money into airports' pockets for the Federal Aviation Administration. And then there's other states that just have an aviation program. And whether they're not officially channeling money, They're working through certain, different factors within the state. Like here in Alaska or Hawaii, all the airports are owned directly by the state, so state employees are managing those facilities. A little bit unique when you look at it, but when we talked a little bit about the history of Alaska, it kind of makes sense why the state stepped in and said, hey, we need to manage a network of airports. Like in Illinois, most of the airports are run by a local community of some kind, and that's generally what you see in the United States, a city, county, type of ownership management. But here, with the Deseo group, it's an opportunity for me to connect with our state officials and find out really what's happening in the funding mechanism, especially with a lot of the unknowns on the federal government side. So this is a good opportunity to kind of sit down, be with a bunch of officials across not only Alaska, but our state and other states, and our state director is actually becoming chair of NASEO. So again, coming in here, and it's an opportunity to kind of learn what other states are doing and maybe take that back and see if we can do that within our state to really truly just help the funding mechanisms. But I've been thoroughly enjoying my time here in Alaska, thoroughly enjoying the opportunity to again get out and connect with people and then connect back here with you on the podcast because I love doing that. I talked a little bit at the beginning about me buying a potential Awaco, and I actually had a conversation with some folks here that are helping me along in some of that process. So I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to putting out some content on my journey and aircraft purchasing. But I would love to hear from anybody out there that listens to this show that either owns one, did own one, or has any thoughts or ideas for me as a new aircraft potential owner here to come into the spring and summer. So if you have not only thoughts there, but comments, questions, suggestions for the show, please send us an email at dapodcast85@gmail.com. Love to hear your thoughts, comments, suggestions. And I will be traveling home, and then I'm heading right back out on Saturday for our state conference, and then trying to get the day job and all this stuff together. So thank you so much for coming along with me on this journey. And until next time, my friends, I'll see you down the runway.